1 week season.
Hello, OWS fam. Happy New Year. I'd like to welcome you back here to the podcast, the Bias Check podcast for week 18. If you're on the YouTube, you can see my new merch. I got a great coffee mug and a shirt with a logo with the words Bias Check on it. So this podcast is taking off in the new year. It is a new year, and we are into week 18. I would like to start here by just reviewing the idea of bias. I think as we get into week 18, there are always sort of a lot of biases that are affecting us. When you get into the playoffs, similarly, there's sort of a thinner line to first. Biases are always going to be a lot sort of more important to recognize and to make good decisions around on smaller slates. So let's just kind of review the idea of bias and how they affect, in particular, you. This is a thought exercise, so please be ready to kind of think along with some of these questions. Let me take another sip of water here from my beautiful mug. All right. So first, start by asking yourself, as we review sort of the idea of bias, are your biases of the simple variety? And therefore, are they easier to diagnose? So some of us are just sort of fall prey to the same biases all the time. Ask yourself, do you tend to let recent performance dictate your choices? That's sort of one of the obvious things that we want to make sure we at least are recognizing. Are you often swayed by one writer, the way they frame the information that you are looking for? That might be a good thing for you to think about on OWS, right? If you are swayed more by one writer than another, that's just something to recognize, right? Are you always sort of jumping on new situations, whether it's injury replacements, right? Kind of hoping to hit large ceiling at a cheap cost. Are you sort of more prone to kind of jumping around to those things, just trying to kind of get lucky, right? Hit it big. Whatever the bias is, what we're about is we're trying to recognize it and play through it. So it's okay if we fall prey to some of these things. We just got to recognize it and play through it. More likely, as it is with me, you're prone to new biases every week. But even that realization is a great benefit, right? If you feel like you fall into this category of players, you're probably someone who has a lot of NFL knowledge, right? You're looking to kind of confirm. You're looking probably to confirm the way that you play. Confirm the way that you confirm what you know through your rosters, right? Building your rosters to reflect sort of your understanding of the NFL, your understanding of the game environments, and your rosters sort of always reflect that. Again, those are good things, right? Strong NFL knowledge, understanding of the game environments, trying to build rosters that kind of confirm what we think we know. But lately, especially late in the season, there's a few things to think about, right? Time is possibly limited. Energy may be low. Confidence may be high. So your brain now at this point is probably trying to take some shortcuts, right? Seemingly simpler decisions that are ripe with bias, but we just miss it. And that's really our fast brain kind of at work, our fast brain that we've sort of built up throughout this season as we've gotten used to doing this week in and week out and gained a lot of information. In that respect, bias isn't always bad, right? Because we want simple decisions. We need simple decisions. But bias is bad when it's compounding, right? And when it compounds upon itself. So what's happening there? Well, the person that's making the bias decisions, right, isn't really making any decisions at all. And if a game of DFS is a game of decisions, then a bias player isn't even really playing DFS. right? At this point in the season, they may be just grabbing the median projections, which have gotten better as the season goes on, right? Spreading them across some games, especially if you're using a lineup builder. You probably have a process already. You just kind of plug these things in and hoping that enough solid plays sort of add up for you. I think a lot of our competitors fall into that category. I think a lot of people play DFS that way. If they've been playing that way the whole season, they're probably, just doing this one more week and similarly doing that, where they're not playing DFS. They're just, taking what someone else says and trying to get lucky. We don't want to do that. A few biased decisions in this regard can easily, create a roster that really has no path to first. I think I've heard a few of our contributors talk like that. They can look at players' lineups and say, this is not a great player. They're just building lineups that really have no path to first. But some of these lineups still feel good when you build it. And that's why people put those lineups into play. It feels good to sort of put them into play. So those are obviously the most dangerous rosters, tricking us into thinking that, we're a good DFS player or there's hope, for a first place finish. When in fact, right, some of these lineups, there is no hope to a first place finish. So as we go into this week 18 and kind of reviewing what bias is, let's sort of set this out there. I've said it before. The bar this week isn't perfection. Perfection is the enemy of the good. What we are searching for this week is this: be more intentional and discerning than the players who aren't really deciding anything at all. And that's what we're sort of after and trying to explain this week in our week 18 bias check. Now, I have already heard many thoughts across the Discord, including and on X, including from people who are very good DFS players. Thoughts like, right, well, I'm not really cut out for this kind of week. Week 18 doesn't really match my strengths. People saying, oh no, as these sort of hidden plays or less known plays, the backups start to get mentioned. People saying, oh no, I don't really know enough. I don't really want to learn enough this week. I'm just going to skip it and wait for the playoffs. Again, those may be sound decisions for you, but they reflect a lot of bias. And if that's your thinking, you're really going to have to turn that around before, putting in some rosters this week. Because while some of that thought may be true, I'm also not fully confident that the people sort of spreading these thoughts actually have enough analysis kind of their own process or styles to make those judgments. And so it really is just a bias, right? It gives you a way out from week 18, or, a reason to sort of not put in as much work during, what's still sort of a holiday time. So again, I don't know where you are at, but that's how bias is going to work in each of us sort of along the way. And let's kind of look at what are the particular biases this week, and what do we need to avoid, and possibly how do we recognize and still play through these biases. So the first one is, much like the beginning of the season, it's information overload right now. And let's talk about why that's particularly dangerous this week, right? Think about it. How many sources are you using right now? I did a class on recognizing biases heading into the season, and was asking people similar questions, right, as they prepped for the season. Think about it. How many sources are you leaning on right now for information about week 18? Think of the beat writers that you are checking their Twitters, right, or getting alerts for things that they say. Think of the threads on social medias about incentives. People have put together kind of nice looking incentives for a lot of gambling threads and things like that. How many of those are you following? How many of those incentives are kind of clouding or adding to the information that you're taking in? I'll talk a little bit more about incentives because that's a big thing for week 18. Just to be clear, we are still looking for head-to-habit scores this week, right? Head-to-habit scores often come from game environments or spikes in volume. I haven't quite seen incentives yet that will produce huge spikes in volume. I do want to be looking out for those. I think Keenan Allen has something where he needs, 6 catches or 9 catches or something like that, to hit a certain bonus. Those could be useful pieces of information if we think the team isn't in a place where they can do that. Because if someone like Keenan Allen, right, has a target spike, he could be valuable this week. But some of these incentives, right, they're going to be hit. People are going to hit on their incentives, and that's still not going to produce a usable or tourney-winning score for us. So again, something to think about. Just because they have an incentive doesn't mean that the score that they produce, if they reach their incentive, is all that usable or useful to us. Again, sources of information, and those are incentive threads. Thinking about snap counts and speculation on snap counts, right? Who is spreading that information, and why are you sort of accepting it from this person or that person? People telling you who might sit, right? Who might play half a game, who might play one quarter. Coach speak, right? But also coach speak, which, where you might have a coach saying one thing, but then their actions, historical actions, say another, right? Someone who's saying, yeah, we're going to play all our players, but every year they sit all their players, when they're in a similar position. So how can we trust any of that? Well, again, I am not here to say what to trust or what not to trust. I'm here to question you and make you realize that you are probably taking in a lot of information right now. And suddenly when you do this, lineup construction is no longer the focus, right? It's, do I have better information than everyone else? And we don't know, if that information is good. The week 18 becomes about chasing information, right? Not edges, which is something we need to caution ourselves. You do not want to be chasing information. You want to be chasing edges, information that is actionable, that leads to an edge. If you can do that sort of analysis, write that down, keep that in your back pocket. It's going to create, right, a few of these powerful cognitive traps for our competition, for everyone out there, for you. Because you don't, think about confirmation bias. That's a powerful cognitive trap. Confirmation bias, of course, we are looking for ideas that confirm what we want to see happen or what we already think we know, right? Because you don't consume information equally. If you're consuming all this information, it's not going to be equal, right? You're going to filter out that information to try to confirm what you already want to do. That is just happening as you are going through information, right? You might be telling yourself, on a Friday night, well, yeah, I'm doing research. I'm checking through X, or I'm checking through, the Discord. But really what you're doing is you're just kind of like collecting permission that allows you to play the plays that you want to, that you feel comfortable with, that make lineups that look, right, pretty good. So that's something to think about, right? As you're consuming information, right? Are you filtering it to sort of confirm what you already want to do? Think about that. There's recency or availability bias, right? We hear things at different points in the week. Already there's, information out there about, Sam Darnold, has $1 million incentive if he, I think, throws for 150 yards and gets 3 touchdowns. I'm sure, that's a Saturday game. That's information that's already out there. I guess this would be better if there was information about Sunday. But all of a sudden, right, something comes in later in the week. So you start planning around that idea. Well, I got to use Sam Darnold and who's gonna get the touchdowns that he's gonna throw it to. Okay, that makes JSN a really good play, et cetera, et cetera. But then new info drops, right? Because info is going to be coming in all week, even up until and especially on Sunday morning. So what do you do with the new information? It's important to start planning for that. Often, right, we overweight the most recent thing. Oh, this new information came in, right? This is really valuable. I have more certainty in that, or I'm more interested in that. That's sort of what we do. Or we stubbornly cling to the first thing because we don't want to make changes, right, based on new information. So we have the potential to do both things. Neither one is a good. Neither one, sort of recognizes biases. Either way, the weighting is wrong. Right, but how can you properly weight that info? You need to make decisions early. I often talk about this. Make decisions early. You might have a process of making some decisions every night after a new set of info comes along, so that what you hear Saturday, you can sort of weigh against what you've already decided. Once we have too much information or too many ideas, right, we will be sort of juggling that information in our heads. Very easy at that point to sort of drop a ball, or more likely to just improperly weight all of that information and say, well, this one because I learned about it recently, or this one because I've it's been on my mind all week. Is more important. We know that the time that you heard a decision is probably the least sort of valuable way to sort of properly weight that information. It's not really time dependent. Okay. Here's another bias that is going to happen to us in week 18. I'll call it false precision. False precision. Week 18 kind of makes us feel like we can solve this chaos, right? Again, there's so much information. As long as I know everything, I can sort of make a guess about how this is all going to play out, and I can solve the chaos, right? People are going to start pretending to know who's going to play and how much they're going to play. When someone is sitting out, right, we pretend to know which backup is going to get the usage. I think Philadelphia has already announced that they're going to sit starters. So if Barkley sits, right, we assume who the backup is and who's going to get all that usage. Well, again, that may or may not be the case, but our mind starts thinking that we can do that, that we can sort of be precise there. Which incentives matter the most, right? Again, we don't know this. We don't know how someone reacts to an incentive. So the certainty around all this is actually quite a bit lower, not higher. But a lot of us are going to be saying, if we're playing this, and diving into the information, right? Yes, I know how to sort of organize this information and what to take and what to treat. But it's a unique week, right? We have not had to probably handle this much information throughout the season. So who's going to sort of do well with it? Who can we trust? Again, the certainty is lower, not higher. Right? It's not this week, right? How do I outsmart the slate? I think when we get too much information, we can start thinking that, well, if I plan more, it's not how do I outsmart the slate. It's how do I navigate through this noise without abandoning the structure that helps me, without abandoning the process that has led me to some sort of success. So that's, again, something to continue to think about, navigating the noise without abandoning your structure. One interesting thing to note this week is this is a 13-game slate again. We have not had many 13-game slates. Something to think about with the bias and a 13-game slate. It's sort of two main biases. The first one I'll call correlation aversion. People are averse to correlation on these larger slates because it feels kind of risky to pull a lot of players from one spot, right? Especially if we don't know a lot about all of these spots. You might say, well, I'm just going to pull the players from the different spots that I know about. That is not a sound strategy for lineup building in DFS. That's not something we would suggest any week, right? So it may feel risky to pull a lot of players from one spot, but that's what wins tournaments, right? Correlation always has and always will win tournaments. So again, that bias of correlation aversion on a week like this, I'd say we have to sort of even correlate even stronger, or at least maintain, right, that as part of our practice. And there's also going to be sort of this strong group think exercise. I know on the OWS Discord, right, group think is a very attractive thing because there's a lot of smart people out there. But group think leads our minds, right, to a place where we think we've got to have this low owned kind of like incentive driven guy or backup. And if I get this one right, that's going to enhance all my lineups. Right. And of course, those things matter. We always want to get those players. But in any week, it's not about group think, right, around value pieces that kind of gets there. It's about unique thinking. The same principles that worked all year to find value, to find, lower owned pieces that kind of go off. That's still what we need to be, counting on. Playing playing highly volatile plays at lower ownership, right? Those are some principles that will still work here. Mixing and matching kind of the more volatile plays is probably the best way to try and hit, right, on one of these low owned backups. It's not playing the one that everyone is thinking is going to get the run, right? Because this week we have more variance, we have more uncertainty. So roster construction or sloppy roster construction is going to be more heavily punished this week. All right. Another bias that's going to be sort of creeping in this week that you want to sort of make decisions around, and it might be one of the most important decisions of the week coming here in the middle of this podcast, is what type of a player are you going to be this week? Are you going to kind of simplify your process or embrace the complexity? And what I mean by the complexity is the complexity of the slates, right? There are early only slates so the early only slate, the afternoon only slates, right? These are totally viable this week because I think there's like 6 games in one, 7 in another. The Saturday slates, right? All the showdowns. You kind of know what player you are if you play all the slates. But again, why is it an important decision? Because each of these slates requires different analysis, right? Not only do we have a 13-game main slate this week, we have a 7-game afternoon slate, a 6-game early only, right? The Saturday slate is 2 games. These are a lot of different ways of analyzing slates and styles of DFS play for a week where there's already a lot of variance, right? What type of a player are you? Are you going to sort of dive into that, the complexity, or do you need to simplify? And it's probably important to make that decision before doing research, because what slates you're going to play affects kind of what research you do, or what kind of research you do, right? You need to kind of ask yourself, right, what am I actually good at? Where do I make my best decisions? Where does your edge show up? Now, hopefully you know those answers to those questions. It could be that you don't, right? You don't know where your edge shows up. You just like to sort of play all of these, and you're still trying it and figuring out. That's fine, but realize that you need to sort of have a deep level of thinking around each unique kind of slate. All right. So I'm going to kind of share at least what I'm doing this week to simplify for the week 18 main slate. After that, I will go into some biases that I'm looking at for the Saturday 2-game slate. I will not talk about the sort of 6 or 7 game slates, afternoon only and early only. However, if you want some ideas on that, always feel free to reach out, message me on Twitter. I'm on X, I'm at Matthew Petrich1, or on the Discord over at OWS Matty P. So here's what simplified model that I'm using this week. I am starting, because it's a 13-game slate, and there are some places of sort of deep uncertainty. I am going to eliminate some games. JM did a really nice sort of high-level overview of the slate on his journal. I'm taking some of that information, some of my own information, and just eliminating some of the games or teams. It's a 13-game slate, right? I could get 200 points out of 2 games. We know that is possible to play a 2-game slate, right, and get 200 points. So if I'm searching for a pathway to 200 points, right, I don't need every game. So if there are too many questions on some, I'm just going to move on. So for example, Green Bay and Minnesota, a lot of questions about whether Green Bay has anything to play for. Minnesota's already an extremely good defense. That's a game where I'm just going to sort of leave those 2 teams out of my pool, and I'm just going to move on. Right, Denver at the Chargers. Questions about whether Herbert will play. I'm just going to take that game and move on. I'm going to eliminate those teams. Las Vegas and Kansas City. These are 2 teams that I think have some of the worst offenses in the league right now. I'm just going to move on. Washington and Philadelphia. I know Philadelphia is going to have some reserves that provide some value, but that is a game that I don't trust, and I'm going to move on. And I'm going to play this like a 9-game slate because I think there's enough within those 9 games that I can find, a pathway to 200 points. So why am I doing this? Well, it's this idea that you don't need to be right about everything in DFS. You just need to be right somewhere, and I think I can be right somewhere within those 9 games. So what am I doing? I'm identifying games that can produce either a 4x value stack, right? Again, that's 2 or 3 players, usually correlated with their quarterback, who together can realistically hit 4x their price. Or I want a stack or a game that can produce, multiple 30-point outcomes. And those are stacks where you have sort of condensed usage on some of these teams, and the scoring is going to be quite high. So those touchdowns will help accumulate those 30-point scores. And that kind of helps me at least narrow the slate pretty fast. The games that I think have actual paths to, these multiple 30-point outcomes, Detroit at Chicago, right? I just think those are 2 teams that are playing this just like a regular season game. And if in any regular season matchup between those 2, right, we would say on both sides of that, we can imagine a scenario where multiple players are scoring 30 points. New Orleans at Atlanta. I think Chris Olave just got ruled out, so there might be this might be something that I check back on. But it's also very possible now without Chris Olave that a 4x value stack can be found from that New Orleans team. Or even that game, may produce multiple 30-point outcomes. I think I'm wavering a little bit more on that one. Cleveland at Cincinnati, right? That one is kind of game script dependent. Cleveland, I think, has to kind of keep up with Cincinnati a little bit for that game to be able to produce, multiple 30-point outcomes. But it's very possible that could happen, especially from the Cincinnati side. And then Dallas at New York Giants. I think a lot of people are probably looking at that game. But again, that's kind of like a stack that game up or fully fade it. And if you stack it up, right, there is a pathway, I think, to multiple 30-point outcomes from that one. So I'll be looking at those games. Right, we're gonna make sure we correlate. These are just sort of simple things to make sure you're doing. Correlate through your quarterback, right? Every lineup that you're going to have I think this week is going to have a QB that's correlated with another 2 or 3 players on your roster, right? And not just good plays. Don't waste this correlation. Just finding a quarterback that you like with one wide receiver. I think you can do better here. It doesn't mean that you are going to ultimately get the highest scoring wide receiver with their quarterback, that pairing. But the closer we can get to correlation and getting multiple parts of our lineup right, that's going to lead us to first place. So again, we don't want good plays here. We want the plays that are going to lead us to tournament wins. Something that adds, right, a strong path to first place. And then we're going to look at running backs, right? Again, we don't have to kind of galaxy brain the running back position. I did not play last week, but I did here, and I wasn't able to kind of check my lineups, but I did hear, and correct me if I am wrong, that most of the high-owned running backs failed to produce last week. And what you needed were the lower-owned running backs, right? The sub 1% running backs that went off, for 20, 30 points. I guess there was one running back from Cincinnati that was somewhat decently owned that put up 30 points. But when we sort of studied running back all year, probably helpful to stay within the top ownership tier, right? The top 10 owned running backs. And again, depending on how many rosters you play, sprinkle in some of the sub 1% owned running backs. Someone who you think could have an efficient outing, could spike for some usage or touchdowns. But we see that regularly these sub 1% owned running backs kind of go off for 30 points. And you had to have it to take down a tournament. They're wildly plus EV to search for those because, again, there are not that many to choose from. And they have been, hitting sort of throughout the year. So that's what I'll be looking for, right? And as I look through these games, right, I can kind of apply some of that knowledge as I look through these games. Again, this is nothing new. I'm not sitting here trying to deduce, what backups are going to play. I'm just trying to go through what has worked all year for me, apply it to some of the games that, I don't have reason to believe that teams are going to sit players. No one's told me that they're going to sit players, but also realizing I can't have all that information. The only person with all that information is probably the coach making the decisions. So looking at like New Orleans and Atlanta, right? We have clear usage. We have clear roles. And if Atlanta is forced to throw in this one, right, we have a path to ceiling, even on the Atlanta side. So that's something to look at. Again, it's not certain that game is going to produce fantasy-worthy scores or tourney-worthy scores, but we know what needs to happen. Again, it's sad that Olave's out because he has been someone who has been able to put up those big scores. So I'll have to kind of reevaluate that one. Cleveland and Cincinnati. If Cleveland scores at all, and they did in that game versus Buffalo, I think they had another game, Tennessee, where they sort of put up a decent score. So it makes me think that they have a chance to do that here versus Cincinnati. If Cleveland scores at all, right, Cincinnati can break the slate. They have been passing, at a higher clip. They've been playing fast. So here's one where, I'll likely be playing the Cincinnati defense, or I'll be playing the Cincinnati offense, right? Not sort of mixing or matching there. I'm looking for something that's going to win a slate, take down a tournament. Detroit, Chicago, right? This is a game with known volume, right? There's real stakes here for both teams. Even Detroit, I would argue, has some real stakes to this game. There's real scoring paths. Full stacks are absolutely viable here. So I would say, again, this is a game that you can see a path to hitting first place in a tournament, if this game kind of goes off. Dallas and New York Giants, same thing, right? And I think this one's, somewhat interesting because both defenses are quite vulnerable. So what's going to happen is, right, if the offenses are, I don't know how to say this, playing to win. If they are, doing things that sort of mimic what they've done all season, we know that Dallas is going to find ways to score. We know that Dallas is going to find ways to give up points as well. So again, I think a full stack here is something you can be confident in. But again, if something else happens in this game, where say Dallas maybe is not pressing as much, or New York is just trying to slow down the game and kind of get out of there without injuries, well, then that's going to affect the whole kind of flow of the game, and you don't really want a piece of it. So that's how I'll probably be attacking that spot. And just for yourself, like, go through the rest of the games on this. Try to think about where are the spots that you want to focus your attention, and build lineups similar to the way you've been building them all season, right? Focus on that roster construction. Make sure every lineup you build has a path to 200 points or more, right? Make sure there's correlation. You don't have to hit on every single low-owned play in a lineup to win this week, even though that's how it's going to feel. And don't let that sort of information that need to have all the information overload you. I can just imagine the feeling of not having all the information, right? And what that will do to you as you're building lineups. It's gonna force you away from lineup construction. So think about that. Write it down somewhere, that this is still a slate about lineup construction. It's not about having the most knowledge. All right, in closing, because we do have a fun Saturday slate, especially as a Seahawks fan, I'm looking forward to watching that game. Hopefully, having a lineup that is in contention for that 2-game slate. So I'll just kind of talk through what are some of the biases I am noticing. First of all, on a 2-game slate, especially the Saturday slate, people who are going to be playing will be experienced DFS players, but also people who just want action, just want to be in on the action. People are probably going to want to have some sense of certainty, have a lineup that feels good. So all those things still apply here, and of course that's where the mistakes are going to happen, because the pricing is such that you can fit in a lot of the people that feel a lot more certain here. Okay, so what are the biases? Well, with let's look at recency bias in particular, and I think this applies a lot to the San Francisco 49ers. They're finally healthy, right? They're playing great. They've had 3 great results after their bye week. Again, the opponents have been, middling to bad. I think it's been Indianapolis, Tennessee, maybe it was one of their opponents. And then the third opponent, shootout with Chicago, right, who allows a lot of explosive plays. Right, so they've been playing well, but their opponents haven't been great. Right now, they're going to go face Seattle, right, who has a great rush D and a good pass D. Well, San Francisco has been excelling in the pass game. I think Purdy has had a ton of touchdowns recently. Is Purdy going to be able to convert those touchdowns in the red zone? Against a Seattle team that has kind of been above average at preventing red zone touchdowns. So I think a lot of people probably will play Purdy, will play those pieces from the San Francisco offense because of recency bias and thinking less about the Seattle defense. I imagine a lot of people will play that as a shootout, that game. So if stacking that game, because again, there's a lot of great pieces in there, you might want to think about not stacking it for a shootout and playing it just a little bit differently. What does that mean? I'm not sure right now. If people don't play Bryce Purdy, I imagine they will go all the way down to Bryce Young. He has, the quote unquote easiest matchup here for a quarterback against a Tampa Bay sort of pass funnel defense. So people are probably going to go all the way down to Bryce Young or pay up for Purdy. The issue with Bryce Young is that he rarely gets enough attempts to kind of hit for a ceiling. So is this a game, where he's going to get 45 attempts because, he's not that good. He can't really score that many points on efficiency just because he doesn't hit his players all that often. He's not an efficient quarterback. So I might be asking myself on this slate, according to the bias is sort of pushing me all the way up or all the way down. What do you need if you play a middle quarterback? What do you need if you roster a Mayfield? What needs to happen for Mayfield to be the quarterback, that wins the tournament, or Darnold? Right? Baker Mayfield probably needs to be pushed, or he needs some sort of stack certainty, some sort of certainty about who he's going to be passing to. That would be helpful. Darnold probably needs that same thing, stack certainty, or he just needs to be probably more efficient. He never gets a ton of passing attempts. And of course, if Darnold is pushed, that means that Purdy is likely doing something good. So that wouldn't differentiate them too much. But the bias here is pretty clear about at least where the starting point will be. I'm going to be thinking about this instead, because I don't think this is what people will think about. What if both games are kind of middling but competitive? Because there's a lot on the line. I can imagine both games very easily going down that path. That would probably lead me to want to take a couple pieces from every team or every game, but that's going to be duped because we know who those more attractive pieces are. So overstacking is actually going to be an easier path to first. But how can I overstack, right? Planning for a game that doesn't shoot out, but instead allows me maybe for a lot of stack certainty. Because why am I going that route? Because not a lot of people, I think, will build lineups with that in mind. And I think that takes me off of putting in a player from every game, and it takes me off of playing for a shootout. All right. A couple things that are obvious to think about. You can include both CMC and JSN pretty easily. So make a decision on each of them. I think you can play both, but if you do that, you're going to need a team or game overstack, to have any confidence at producing a tourney winner. Because if you play CMC and JSN, the other plays, you're mixing and matching. The probability for hitting that is going to be lower, and the ownership on all those plays is going to be higher. So again, I would say if you do play both, you probably need a team overstack or a game overstack to have any chance at producing a tourney winner this week. Those are my thoughts on the Saturday slate. I'll see you at the top of the leaderboards there. And finally, right, bias or recognizing that you have bias does not mean that you are bad at DFS. It means that you're human. The edge is not in eliminating the bias. It's recognizing when it's driving the decision-making instead of strategy, and trying to lean on strategy more than the biases, right? So this week, play with intention, right? Make sure every lineup has a real path to first, that it's not just a good feeling. If you are in the Inner Circle Discord, a couple of weeks ago, I left a sort of path to first checklist that you can go through and check your roster against that. So there you go. Good luck this week. If you want any merch, just let me know. All right. Peace out, everyone.